Okay. So in class today, we're going to be going over model view controller again, like the full thing that we've been doing in groups. So what we're going to be doing is splitting into groups of say 3 people, and amongst your group, you can decide who's going to be the model developer, who's going to be the view developer, and who will be the route or controller developer. So get moving. Yes, yeah, we're gonna be like working together. It's not gonna be like I don't have any slides to go over. We kind of went through all the slides on like how Mongoose and stuff works, but what we're gonna be doing is instead of so typically when you go out into in the workplace, it's not common for you to do everything. Usually you start to like specialize. So some people are more like a back-end developer that would be like the controllers. Some people would be more front-end, which would be like the views or even front-end JavaScript. And then with the models, sometimes you would have that done with the people that are doing the controllers or whatnot. But the idea with this is being able to design a route that passes stuff to the view without it being the same person. So kind of being able to talk and say like, hey, I'm going to be passing in these variables. This is what it looks like, and trying to communicate that, all while working inside of GitHub. So what we're going to be doing is adding a new model, route, and view for developer, genre, or another new field you determine. Is appropriate for games. If you add a new field, be sure to add it to the game MVC files. And then there's also another one that's down here. We could do like a car. Like at this point, it doesn't really matter what you're building, but if you want something that's already kind of chosen, you can do that. Then you can add a link in your nav bar to a forum for asking a new developer, genre, or other, create a new model and schema, and then create a get and post handlers for adding this new type of document. So if we break into groups of 3, right here I've already created a week 6 folder, so I'm just going to use express. Let me bump up the font size. Express.double-view equals pug. And echo node modules into .gitignore. No, that didn't work. Oh. So right now, I'm just creating a GitHub branch or a GitHub repository for this week's class. I'm going to call it COMP2106 Winter 2019 Week 6. Create, add remote, and push it up. So I don't know if you guys have broken into groups yet or not, but as you're doing that, just for a couple of people who have trickled in, last night assignment part 1 was due, and I'll just quickly show you guys an example of someone that submitted it. Everyone kind of did theirs like a little bit differently, of course, but this is kind of actually a good example of what the final product, when you're done part 2, could end up looking like. So this was done by Matt, and you have your kind of like about you section, portfolio section, you have contact information, a form, I'm sure I could probably fill this in, and it does something. I'm assuming it did something in the back end. Okay. And then this links off. So yeah, the only parts that is missing is there needs to be like a services thing, a services tab or another section that would be on the website. This kind of explains it, but I would like to at least have a minimum of 2 pages, just so. Aha, there it is. Okay. Yeah, I tried to go to clicking these and they just broke. So.
Are they broken or just empty? Yeah, there's just nothing in them yet.
Yeah, well, I feel like I tried that before and it wasn't working. I don't know. Maybe you added stuff to it since I looked at it. I don't know. Okay. Yeah, so this is kind of just a quick example. I don't expect your portfolio to be this elaborate. I think, honestly, you did a great job, especially just for part 1. But the point of this assignment is you can now give this to a potential employer, and they can kind of like see what you're able to do. Because this is built in Node, you can say, you know, that you have back-end experience, front-end experience, working with like a database, all that sort of stuff. So that's kind of what the purpose of this project is. And if you end up doing any sort of freelance, you have a website that you just now need to periodically update instead of build a whole new one. Because that's really the kind of struggle sometimes is I've gone to build a portfolio site and then I just give up because it takes too long. So, but yeah, so that was just an example of one. And as you can see up here, Matt has used a domain that he has. So he's already linked it with, I'm assuming, Heroku. Yeah. If you haven't, or if you don't have a domain, as I said, you can get one through this GitHub student package. And if not, I'm not expecting you to buy a domain by any means, but if you're more than welcome to if you want, and attach it. Yeah, so that's really it. So.
With Heroku, I always have to go in and do
The deploy button?
Thank you,
Yeah, so you have to tick a button for continuous deployment.
Yeah,
So I had gotten an email. Let's log into this one. So it's usually good to set this up before you start pushing to it, just because it makes it a little bit easier. Where is it? Deploy. So you just want to make sure that it's set up for automatic deployments on the branch that you're wanting to. And then after you set that up, any new pushes to that branch will then be automatically deployed, provided that there is no errors. If there is an error as it tries to deploy it, it will just revert back to the previous working one that it knows of.
Will it let us know if there's an error?
Typically, yeah. You can also go in, I believe it's here, and you can view the logs of what ended up happening. So right now there's not much here because it deployed successfully.
And is it kind of simultaneous?
It can take a little bit. It uses probably in the background what is called webhooks. So it's connected to GitHub, and when you push up the code, it kind of sends a message to Heroku to let it know that it should rebuild. Because we're using the free tier, it probably has a lower priority in the queue compared to someone that is like paying, where it should be like instantaneous. But yeah, but when you connect it for the first time, if you want to just see what you have, you just want to like deploy the branch because, like I said, it will only listen for new pushes to that branch. So you just gotta deploy it manually, and then you're good for the future. So yeah, good work. Let's see. Okay, so I've set up project for today. Is there anything that you guys want to try to build? If there's any sort of recommendations on something, because really we could build anything, but it might not be useful. If there's anything that someone has as a recommendation. A user profile? What do you mean by user profile? Oh, okay. That's actually next week.
Oh, perfect.
We're going to be going over like login and stuff like that. That will be next week. It's authentication part 1. And then when we come back from reading week, it'll be authentication part 2, then followed by front end React stuff. That will be hopefully fun. So yeah, anything besides that? Any sort of recommendations? Because I want to make you guys enjoy this. So. All right, so we're gonna build Blackboard or some sort of class management thing. How about let's do that? So when we're using Blackboard, there's a couple things. So as a teacher, you can see here I have courses, and I actually have courses where I am considered an instructor, and then I also have courses where I'm considered a student. So you can both be a faculty member and a student at the same time. So really, it would just be grabbing 2 lists of information, ones where you're registered in a class as a student, one where you're registered as the instructor. As well as you would want to be able to have classes that has like a bunch of different types of information for it. In this case, we also have like course content done by weeks, week 1 through, whatever. So the first thing that we're going to do is, I guess I have to run it. So let me npm install save nodemon, and I will also install mongoose as well. Also, the other thing I guess I just want to quickly touch on, for some of you in your assignment part 1, it's usually always good to create this git ignore file before you do your first initial commit, because that way it will not upload your node modules folder, because that will take up a fair bit of space. Right now, if I open this in Finder and just do, oh, okay. So right here you can see that right now it's at 11 megabytes on disk, but this can actually start to grow pretty quickly into some more. So
Can you just quickly go over how you made like the list of week 6 that you have there? Can you just run over that again real quick?
Oh, yep. So like all the files that are in here?
Yeah.
Yep. So this is where I created the folder called week 6, and then I ran the command express with a period meaning the same folder, and then --view equals pug, and that will create all the files for you. Then you have to do npm install to install your modules that are a part of it. Actually, that's probably why it's not as big. I haven't installed those yet. And then you have to run. The $ just means like that's the typical sign for like a bash shell. So you just only have to run the text. So if I run npm install just to install the other stuff, this is probably where it's going to get a little bit bigger. So we're up to 38.7, and now I'm going to install mongoose as well. So now we're already up to now 45.6 megabytes. So this is the reason why you don't want to upload all these files onto GitHub, because it'll take up a lot of room. And there's also just under 8,000 files already in the node modules folder. Also, would you guys prefer if I turned off the lights for the projector?
Yes.
Okay. Surprised that none of you guys have said that. I didn't realize that I had the controls up here. So, yeah, that looks way better. Okay, cool. So yeah, so that was just like a small tidbit. I saw that some people had uploaded their node modules folder. It's not like wrong. It's just, well, it is wrong, but I didn't take marks off for it just because it's sometimes it can be a little bit complicated. But the reason why we don't need to push up these node modules is when we download a project from GitHub onto, say, like a new computer, the list of all our modules is inside package.json. And this is a list of everything that we can npm install, and it will just automatically generate that node modules for us again. So now that we have we've done that, what we should probably do is create a models folder. And I'm going to create a model called class.js. So once you, I'm just going to make sure that, yeah, my microphone is unmuted. Okay, just double checking. I'm going to require in mongoose. And I'm also going to create a variable called schema based on mongoose.schema. And then I'm going to say const user equals new schema. And then I'm going to do module.exports equals mongoose.model user, and then I just give it the user schema. Oh, I called it user. I meant to say class. I'm sorry. So rename that to class. So as I mentioned, when we're using Mongo, we don't, or at least, yeah, sorry, when we're using Mongo, we don't have to generate the ID that is automatically done for us, so we don't have to bother putting in any sort of like unique identifier. But what we should put in for is a name, which will be a string. We're going to have a course code, which is going to be another string. Let's put semester, which is going to be also a string. So semester, what we can put, maybe even not even semester, but a term, because that'll be either the summer, winter, or fall term. And we'll have students, which is an array. And we should probably check if we can, you can also create like an array of and have nested models. So in here, I'm just going to do mongoose.js, read the docs, blah, 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 array. Okay. So in this case, what they're doing right here is they have a schema that they've created of a toy, and then they have a toy box. And what they have is, this will be an array of toy schemas. So if we, all we'll know is that we'll want this to be an array of students. Then we'll also have a instructor, and that will also be, actually, we'll, instead of saying students, we're going to say person. So it's going to be an array of persons, as well as instructors is also going to be an array of persons. Just because sometimes in, I had one class here where in the first half of the semester was taught by one professor and the second half was taught by another. So you can sometimes have multiple professors assigned to a single class. So if you were to actually use this right now, it would error out because we have not created, it doesn't know what this person variable that it's trying to reference right here is. So references person model, references person model, and we'll just say that it's an array of export model of our class schema. So right now, after creating that, I'm just going to do a git commit. So creation of class schema /model. And then we're going to create another model that is going to be our person model. So we can just copy everything that's here, paste it, and call it a person, 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 and we'll just get rid of everything that's here. So for a modeling a person, we're going to be putting in a first name as a string, last name as a string, we'll give them a student number, which is going to be a number. Pretty sure no one here has like a student number that has any letters in it, do they? I don't think that's possible, no. What other sort of stuff should be put in? Yeah, the program that they're in, which can be a string. We could also, like in this case, I'm just going to do it as a string, but we could end up creating like a another model that would just be for a program, for program-specific information. Actually, that might not be a bad idea, just because we also have classes that could be tied to a program. So, yeah, we'll do that. So in this case, they're in a program which references program model. And then lastly,
does that not have to be in the square brackets?
no, so the square brackets was because we were going to be having an array of them, meaning multiple.
Okay.
But in this case, a person is just going, for simplicity's sake, is just going to be in one program.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then
it's like the array for the specific student.
exactly. So in here, this references as it's an array of persons, whereas in this one, a person is just going to belong to one single program. And I'm going to copy from the person into here and change person to program. And a program is just going to have a name of string, and I think that's it. We're just going to have a program's just going to be a string. Maybe they do have like a short form, so we could just say like short or maybe code. What's the code for, sorry? IMDW, okay. And then computer programmer is COPR, and then programmer analyst is COPA. So all of the programs at Georgian probably have some sort of short code that references it, so we'll also have that in there as well. So this will be the last model that we'll create, at least for right now. So I'm going to, before I git commit, what I'm going to do now is our person is relying on the program model that we've created, and our class model is relying on this person. So what we're going to do is just below where schema is and before our person, on person, we're going to create a variable called program, and that we're going to require in. So we want to use a dot to mean that we're looking in the same folder, and then do slash, and sometimes in your editor it'll let you know. So we want to import program. We can save that. So require in program model. And then I'm going to copy this right here into our class. And we're going to say we want to require in a person. And person is with a lowercase p. Save that. And that should be it. So the thing that is a little bit tricky when it comes to using Mongoose for, so traditionally, I'll start with saying this. When you work with a SQL database, usually you have your different types in different tables. So when you update something, in this case, class, person, and program would all be in different tables. And a class would reference a person by its ID. In this case, it actually is sub-nested inside of it. So everything is going to belong in technically class with an array of students that will be of type person. And then that person is also going to have a reference to a program, which is a little bit complicated. So their schemas can have middleware, custom validation logic, etc., and any other feature top-level schema can use. The major difference is that subdocuments are not saved individually. They are saved whenever their top-level parent document is saved. So in this case here, you have a parent, and then you end up creating these new children inside of it. The only time that these children are saved is when the parent is saved. So it's a little bit more complex. Subdocuments have save and validate middleware as well. Calling save on the parent document triggers the save middleware for all its subdocuments, and same for validate middleware. So there's a lot of stuff that you can do. So you can validate and make sure that it matches your schema or any additional things that you want to set up, such as you know, if you wanted to put in like a character limit on certain strings or a minimum and maximum on certain numbers, you could do that. So right now we're just going to take the models, so creation of person and program, model, and schema. I said git commits, should just say git commit. Okay, and I will push that up.
How do you go about adding the git ignore?
So the git ignore, you're on Windows or Mac? On Windows, okay, so on Windows it's a little bit harder. I think if you just do it inside Visual Studio Code, it's a little bit easier. But on your folder, if you don't have a folder that says what it is, just click down below. But so you click new file, and you just say .git ignore. Hit enter. Now I already have a file that's called .git ignore. I know on Windows it can be a little bit trickier to create it, just because Windows usually likes there to be some sort of text in front of the period, because usually what is after the period is what type of file it is. So you'd have like a .txt or docx. In this case, it's a .git ignore file, but there's no like beginning to it. So yeah, you just put node underscore modules. You can also do this for like other stuff. So if you wanted, you could like ignore the views folder for some reason if you wanted to. And then you can also start to ignore specific things. So if you had a file that is like super secret, do not upload, inside of your git ignore, you could specifically say don't upload public, super secret, do not upload, just in case if there's any sort of files or a bunch of folders that you don't want to upload. No problem. Okay. So we've created the class person and program. What we're going to start doing is, where is it? Oh, I'm not even running the code. Sorry. Let me just run that first. So inside of our package.json, we want to create a dev script that will be running nodemon on /bin www. And you can save that and then run npm run dev. So now this is running on my machine on port 3000. So you can just type in localhost 3000. And here's our Express application. So same thing as we've done in almost every other class. I am going to copy last week's layout, so that way I don't have to retype it all this week. Save that. In this case, I'm going to change some of this. So Blackboard clone, and we'll put classes, and then that'll be at /classes. So this is our home page, and if we go to /classes, it doesn't currently exist. So that's what we're going to be setting up. So if I create a classes route, we're going to require in express. I'm going to create a variable called router, which is express.router. And then I want to module.exports our router object that we created. And then in here I can create all the necessary information that is in our classes routes. So for one, we'll have a get request. It'll just be, so this slash is signifying that it'll be actually /classes. And that will take a request, response, next object. And we're just going to res.send OK. And that's all we're going to do right now. So I'm sure that you guys have seen that as we start to create more and more routes, I've worked. Yep. So inside of our app.js, when we require in our routes, it can start to get unmanageable with the amount of files that we're going to be putting in. I've worked on an application that has close to like 20 or 30 different routes that all do different sort of things and can start to take up a lot of room inside of our app.js. So right now we only have 3, which is pretty manageable. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file just in the root of our application. And this is going to be route, or actually, hold on. I'm going to create a folder called config first and create a file called routes. So in here is where I'm going to be handling all of the route information for our application. So I'm going to do module.exports equals, and this is going to be, it's going to be an array. And then here's where I'm going to include different information about each route. So we're going to have path, which is / name is index, and file, or I'll call it location, is actually, sorry, sometimes trying to come up with a good name is a little bit harder. So I'm just going to call it controller. And inside here, We can do a couple different things. We can either put a string to it, but I'm just going to actually require in our route and index. And here I'm just going to copy this a couple more times. So we have /users. We're probably not going to use that, but I'll just keep it in anyway. And we also have a classes. Oh, that should be a lowercase c. There we go. So as I kind of said, like sometimes you start to get like 20, 30 different controllers and routes and all that sort of stuff. And it starts to get a little bit harder to manage your application because inside of app.js, there can be a lot of stuff that's going on. If I go through it really quickly, we're requiring a module called HTTP errors, express, path, cookie parser, Morgan, which is used for like console logging. So whenever we end up going to a route, this is the information that Morgan automatically logs to us. So we can see, like, for example, this is a 404, meaning that we didn't get back what we were expecting, 200s, 304s. So inside of app, there's a lot that's going on, and it can get quite large as you also add more stuff to your application, something that you want accessed across the entire thing. So what we can do in here is instead of requiring in this router here and that router there, we can get rid of those. And what we're going to do is call routes, and we're going to require in our config of routes. And then down here, because this ends up getting imported into our app with all the information that's in here, we can actually just loop over everything that's in here. So we can just do routes.forEach, and we're going to have a route. So I'll just say function route, and then we're going to say app.use, and here we say route.path, route.controller. And if I save this, if I open up, you see that it still is working there. And now when I go to home, it still works. Yep. Sorry?
Where did you copy the layout information?
The layout I copied from week 4, but you could probably also copy week 5. It would be pretty similar. You'll just have to remove different pieces of information. So now instead of having to come into our app, we now just have like a config file that will have all of our information. And this is where if we ended up having an application, if say we wanted to turn a feature on and off, so in this case right now we could say that our index file is disabled. So inside of here I could just do a check. So if just enabled. So if our route is enabled, then we want to use it. So now if I refresh here, I get an error because our route that's in here is disabled. But if I put this to true, refresh, now it works. So you could end up hooking this up to a database and then being able to refresh your application based on variables in a database. If for some reason I don't know if any of you guys have used like different services where sometimes you'll see like a message saying that a certain feature has been disabled because of an issue. You'll see it sometimes in like video games where they'll disable certain things. And that's kind of one way that you would go about it, is you would be able to disable it from a database, and then when the whatever website, game goes to grab that information, it knows that it is disabled. So now we need to set up a view for our classes. So previously in other classes, I've just taken, I've just done a dash on what we're going to be calling it. So for example, like classes-create or classes.-edit. In this case, I'm going to actually create a folder to start organizing our different stuff. So I'm going to create a folder called classes. And in here, I'm going to create.pug, edit.pug, delete.pug, and list.pug. And those are typically the four things that, as you guys know, that you typically do with a database. You do creates, reads, updates, and deletes. And these are kind of like the four different views that we're going to have for our classes. So inside of our list.pug, this is going to be where we're displaying all of the current classes that we have. And we're going to say extends, and we're going to use /layout. Because the layout is in a folder before classes, we have to use the .. And then we still can use block content. And say h1, this is our classes list. Then inside of our classes route, instead of sending res.sendOK, we're going to do res.render. And here we do classes/list. And then give it nothing. So res is just short for response. So just making sure that everything is set up right, /classes. And it says that it's a 404. So inside of here, router.get. Oh, did I disable it? That might be why. Nope. So path. Sorry, I'm just going to try to close some of these files that I've created. This one? Yep. I'm going to remove this part, though. Hmm? Thank you. No, no worries. No, it's always good to point out someone's issues. Oh, okay, there we go. I don't know what I changed, but oh, okay. So I know what I changed. So the reason why that wasn't working. So I was checking that the key enabled was in this list here. So right here it was set to enabled true. And if that key isn't there, by default it's false. So it was not loading in our classes or our users route. So when I removed that inside of the app, that's when it started working. So inside of here, I'm just going to throw it in a container so that we can just tab it in a little bit. So now we have classes and we have home. So if we were to go to Blackboard, you can see here that they kind of have like a similar kind of card thing, similar to like Bootstrap or anything else. What we'll probably do is, well, we can do this. We can do like my courses and display only for that user. Not that we have multi-user right now, but so I'm going to put a button primary that is going to go to /classes/create. I'll say create class. So I'm just going to commit this code right now. So git add period, get commit creation of classes views and get for classes. So now if we refresh, we have a button that goes to classes/create, which doesn't exist yet, but we will set that up. So in here, we're going to do the exact same thing that's in our list. So right now I'm in create.pug under classes, and I'm going to extend from the layout and use block content with a container and just an h1 saying create a class. And then inside of our route, we now need to make it so that it will load this view that we just created. So right below, that's all we need to change. We want to say that it's going to be on the /create route, so classes create, and then we want to load the create file instead of the list file. Once we save that, refresh. Yep. So something that I think we'll do next week, because we're going to be going over authentication, I'm just going to take the same project that we're using this week in class, and we're just going to use it again next week. So we're not going to create a new project, so that way we can continually work off of what we're using. This is a good example of an application that's going to have some sort of login, which would be beneficial. Also, do you guys have any preference on how you guys want to do logging in next week? Because we can do logging in with just like email and password, but you can also log in with different services. such as logging in with like GitHub or log in through Twitter, stuff like that. Does anyone want to do something?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, we can do that. And then also we'll probably be going over emailing as well, just so that way we can do like a small thanks for subscribing kind of email. So we'll, yes. The other thing is if you just want to go to my GitHub and then you could, it would be in this week's code, and then you could just copy it if you're missing something. No worries. So inside of our model that we created for a class, we need to have a name, course code, term, and then we start to have students and instructors, that it's a person. So this one is going to be a little bit trickier to do because of course you want to be able to create multiple students for it, and typically you would just have the class. So yeah, so inside of our class, I'm going to create a form of method is type post as a bootstrap forms form group and then form control, right? Form control. Okay. So we're going to create a form group, and we're going to have a label of for name, a input of name dot form control, type is text, and because we're already using a label, I'm not going to bother to put in a placeholder, but just to make sure how this renders on the screen. It doesn't, oh, whoops. Name. I'm going to copy this a couple times. I'm not going to worry about making the form look really nice just because it's probably better just to get more work done, and then we can try to pretty it up later. So we have a course code. And we also need to add a name value here as well. So that'll be name. Name is course code. Close that. We also need a term, which is also going to be a string. So term. Okay. That's good. And now I just need to do one last with a button of button success. Type is submit. Of create class. And I believe I'm just gonna quickly check our layout. Yeah, okay. So just to make sure, if you do not have it, because we're just about to, make sure that you have font awesome. I wouldn't necessarily go and try to find the link. If you don't have it, just go to my GitHub and just copy this line right here, or line 7 in my layout.pug file, because we're going to be using this for adding students to our class. So actually, one file that I realized that we did not create, which would be helpful, is we're going to need to have a details file for classes, and this will give us specific information about a class. So if you just want to create that file, and we'll go into that after. But once you have this set up, we want to set up the post. So form submission for that, and we want it to be a post type. And here we can see submitted class equals request.body. This is now where we would take our model that we created and create the class. But right now, we actually haven't set up a database connection for Mongoose to be able to use. So I'm going to go into MLab and create a new database. You can also just use your previous one if you want, but I'm just going to create a new one just because it doesn't take very long and it's free. Okay. So now you can take the string either from your already created database or your newly created one, and just make sure that you have a user that you've created to connect to. And inside of our app is where we will require in Mongoose. And then we'll do mongoose.connect. And use new URL parser of true. What did I name that? User. Okay. And then I believe it is when I do. I'm just gonna go to last week's code, just so that I can take that console log that we've been doing when we connect to the database. Which is right here. So on mongoose.connection. Yep. So just to repeat what I did here, I required in the Mongoose library that we are using to connect, and then I use mongoose.connect to connect to it using the string provided in MLab. And then just because Mongoose does throw a warning unless if you pass in this flag. I did use new URL parser as true. Then down below, I created a variable called db based on mongoose.connection, so that way we can listen to its error and open events. And then just below that, this is creating the code that is run when there is an error versus when we run open. So as you can see, instead of using on, we use once. So that way, not every single time that it runs open, it console logs connected to mongodb. So if I just actually ran on, probably I'm going to guess every single time that I run a command, it's going to have to connect to it because it manages its stuff automatically. So I'm just going to keep it at once. And that's it.
So truthfully, do we need lines 22 to 27 right now for what we're doing?
No, it's just always good just to make sure that if you console log connected to MongoDB, that if there is an error, I was going to turn off my internet, but I'm streaming. So if for some reason like your internet wasn't working, it would at least give you a warning in the console letting you know that it can't connect to Mongo, or some other sort of error, like if it didn't exist or wrong username and password, because you don't want to start like developing on something and thinking, oh, my code's not working, but it's actually you're not connected to Mongo at all, so it doesn't know that.
Okay.
So it's just more for like development, just to, it's always good just to know that you are connected to different things.
But for the sake of we're doing clashes to Mongo, mongoose.connect is the
Yeah, just this part. You can ignore everything from 18 to 27 on my screen. Yep, so I will just, now that I've created the connection, I'm going to do a git commit of connecting to Mongo, push that up. And when I refresh, here is our form that we created earlier. So I'm going to have to set up the logic first of inside our classes.js under routes. This is now where we want to, at the top, require in our model. So we want to require in class, const class equals require. We do a double dot to go back, models, and then class. And then here we can say new class equals new class of submitted class. Or if you want to just make it a little bit simpler, you can just do request.body there. Then because with Mongo we have to save it, we want to do new class dot save. I believe it returns back a function with a error. And if there is an error, we want to do next error. Otherwise, we want to just render the list. Although, which would you guys prefer? Would you prefer after we create a new class, do you want to go to the details page for that class that we just created? Or would you prefer to go to the details for it, or just for the list? List? Okay. So in that case, instead of using res.render, I'm actually going to redirect back to list. Does anyone know why it would make more sense to use res.redirect instead of res.render in this case?
No.
So when you use res.render, you can render any sort of arbitrary file, but the route that would be in the URL in like your browser, it would still say /create on it. So you would be rendering a file on the route that is up here.
So we basically be rendering the list on the create page.
On the success of it, yeah. But the other thing is right now we're taking, inside of our list, we want to connect to Mongo and grab all of the classes that we've created, and we don't want to have to duplicate that code. So we don't want to have to grab all of the classes and then render the file in both our create submission as well as on the list page. So what we just say is we're like, okay, you've created this, we're now going to redirect to classes/list, where it will then run all the code that would be required in the list. So because of that, we're going to do class.find, and then we'll have classes. I'll do that lowercase classes. You guys, before me, did you guys go over like fat arrow functions? You guys did that? Okay.
Not like a whole lot. We did it with arrays, or like mapping, and we did it with anonymous functions.
Okay. I usually, like, I'm so used to using fat arrows that sometimes I forget if, like, sometimes I just use function, but if you guys have a preference either way, just let me know. They're pretty much the exact same. I just find that it helps clean it up a little bit. It just makes it easier to read because there's less words. So in this case, we're going to have the code that renders our list. And, oh, we still need that, classes. And I'm also just going to console log the classes.length, just so that way I can know how many classes we have when we load the page in here. Oh, okay. So, invalid schema configuration model is not a valid type at path program. That is probably going to be because those collections are not made. I feel like it should create the collections automatically. Maybe it doesn't. So classes. Let's just see. So it's inside of our person that we created. So inside of person, program is right there. Oh, probably because I don't need, it probably just needs the schema. Let me just double check. That might be actually why it's yelling at us for that. Yeah, so it only needs the schema. So in this case, I'm just going to actually remove this part here and just module.exports program. And I'm going to do the same thing here with person. Because we only actually need the schema, we don't need to create a model, because the model is what it uses based on the schema to grab that information from Mongo. I did it with person, and I did it with program. So now, there we go. Okay, so that is working. And it says right here, you can see it has a 0 because we currently haven't created any classes. But if I create a class, name, COMP2106, enter, create. Oh, we don't have, so inside of here, we actually just want to, we want to redirect just to /classes instead of to here. So we just want to and make sure that you have that slash at the very beginning because that will, instead of appending it to the URL, it will mean that to go right there. Yep. I was just about to go to break after I fix this. So now when I refresh inside of the console, you can see right here if I bump this up, we're not displaying it on the screen yet, but we do have one class that is inside of Mongo that I grabbed back. So right here inside of our collection of class, you can see that we have students, which is an array of nothing, instructors as an array of nothing, but we have our name, course code, and term. Exactly. So that's why we need a details page for our class, so that way we can add an instructor or add students to it. So, yeah. So with that, I'm going to commit the code to GitHub. I'm just going to use git status. Okay. Git commit modify models set up routes git push. Okay. So now the code is on GitHub, and we can now go for, say, 10, 15-minute break, and then be back here by, well, actually, maybe like a, would you guys prefer just like one long break, or do you want another short break later on?
Long break.
One long break? Anyone else? Sure. Sure? Okay. So I'll say be back here in about 20 minutes or so. Cool. Okay, so let's see, where were we? So we just made it so that we could create a class, and we're rendering our create. So now that we are finding the classes that have been created and passing it to our list, this is now where we should start rendering the different classes that have been created and then providing links to add students, instructors, and stuff to it. So right now we only have one class that we've created. So inside of list, let's figure out just on Bootstrap really quickly what's a look that we can go with. Examples. Is it working on yours now?
Yeah, climbing is fine.
Oh, interesting.
So made some kind of mistake.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe we'll go with something like this, just because it's easy. It's already been created. So I'm just going to take the source code for this. Where was it? Right here. So this is where it uses, we have a row with a column MD of 4, card, shadow, card body. So I'll start using that. So in this case, we want to do an each class in classes. Each class in classes. I want to do a row, put that inside of it. And now I'm going to create a mixin called class mixin. So we're going to do, just by taking the code that they have right here, just going to copy it, and we're going to do a column MD4, a card MD4 dot shadow, what is that, shadow dash SM, a card body, p dot card text test, and then they have this. A button group, then a button of button, small button outline. I missed a period there. Button outline. Yes.
I think it's just command Z.
Yeah. Ooh, that makes it. You like that?
Yeah, just so when
Yeah, that's fair.
So kind of try and catch up.
Yep. Okay. That is fair. And I'm just going to put view and edit. And I'm just going to take all this that's here, comment it out. I just want to see if now this is going to render properly on the screen. Unexpected token. So just as a quick heads up, when you typically do some sort of issue with what you've typed in Pug and it tries to compile it, it usually does not give you a very helpful warning or error message. If you see this kind of like acorn under node modules, good chance that you've made a typing error in your Pug file. Just to let you know. And it's probably because of all this commented out stuff that's right here. So I'm just going to remove it for now. And that looks all fine. Nope, still not working. Come on. Button. Should be fine. If I comment this out, that's fine. So it's the part where I'm calling the class mixin. Maybe because I'm not using that variable. There we go. I guess because I wasn't passing it the variable that I was expecting. So now we just have this this one card that's here, and we're going to be filling in the information for it. So because we want to pass it the class, we want this to be class dot, is it class dot name? Actually, we're going to do two different ones because we want to display both the name of the course and the course code at the beginning. So course code separated by a dash. Oh, and you can't also use, that's actually probably why it was yelling at me, is, so class in JavaScript is a protected keyword, which I believe we went over on either week 1 or week 2. So when it sees that keyword, it doesn't like it. But here it is working now. And because we want these view and edit buttons to redirect to a new page, what we're going to do is we're going to make them, instead of being a button, we're going to make them a anchor tag with a href. So in this case, we're going to go to slash classes slash view, and then we're going to give it class.id. In this case, it might be easier just to do it as another mixin, so outline button and say link text and give it href equals link equals text. And now instead of having to write all this over and over again, you can just do this. No, I just did it so that it would actually remove, decrease part of how many indents there were, just to make it a little bit easier because this button is reused multiple times. So we might end up using it again or something. So sure it probably doesn't like it because now it's no longer a button, but yeah, okay. So button outline secondary I don't think works on just an anchor tag for some reason, which is fine. We don't really need it to be, but and same thing with edit. So now that we've set it up for view and edit, we should now set up each of these pages that would display information that is about it. So I'm going to set up the view page first, so that way we can start adding students and an instructor to our class. But first I'm going to take this code that I just made and I'm going to push it up to GitHub. I'm also just going to grab computer programmer Georgian College. I'm just going to grab some course names on here so that way we can have some more classes to work with. So we're going to have HTML, CSS, and JS fundamentals. And this is going to be, sure, that works. Create another. Networking essentials. COMP2106. I'll say that's also in the winter. And I'm just going to do one last one. Okay. So now we have a couple different classes that we can work with here. And we're going to be going to view on this one. So now we have to set up inside of our route. We have to set up a get for view ID. We use our request, response, and next objects. And we want to do class dot find by ID, request dot body or request dot params dot ID, then class for, and then res dot render classes slash view, or I think it's not view, I think I called it details. I'm going to rename our details.pug file to view, just because it makes more sense to have the name of the file to be similar to what your pathing is going to be, just so that you're not necessarily confused on which file you're wanting to render. I renamed under our views, we have a folder called classes. I renamed a file that was in there that was called details to views, or to view, because you can kind of think of it as like it will be a page that will just be a details page for that specific class, but it's also just viewing that specific class. So they're kind of interchangeable. Yep. I'll just throw in some comments using mongoose find our class by its. Yep. Yep. Was it the backtick thing that you were trying to? Yeah. I usually prefer to use the backtick when I'm trying to inject variables into strings, just because it's a little bit easier than using like string concatenation. It starts to get like a little bit messy when you start to do that. So it's a nicer way of being able to inject variables. Okay, so inside of our view.pug file, which is inside of our classes folder, we're going to, as every other file, we're going to extend from layout and put in block content. And I'll throw a container in so that way we can see that. I'm going to do a row, because what I'm going to do is for when you're trying to view something and you come from a page that already has a decent amount of information for it. For example, in classes, we already know what its course code and what the name of the class is going to be, so that kind of information is not as important on the page that we're going to be going to. But what is more important is being able to see a list of students and a list of instructors for that class. So what we're going to do is we're going to split it so that way we're going to have a column 8, so it'll take up 2/3 of the page, and then we'll do a 4 for the right side, and that'll just be more like information about it. So I'm going to do a column medium 8, column medium 6, and I'm going to create a mix-in called sidebar. And here we will, so call, or I don't need to do that, but I'll just throw h1 for students, and here do sidebar, h1 sidebar. So now if I click view, it should, yeah. So we have our sidebar that I'm going to put in a card with a card body, and I'll use an h3 instead and just say information, and say name. It's going to be class.name, and course code, it's going to be class.course code. Students in class is now, we're going to do class.students.length. Correct. Yeah, I will be passing that in from our route. So I'm just going to keep it as underscore class now. Refresh. And there's the course information. I'm just going to get rid of that H1 that says sidebar. Okay. So instead of creating a table, because I really hate tables, I'm just going to be using rows and columns for each student, and that's just going to be wrapped around in something. So I'm just going to create a mixin that's going to be called student, and it will take a variable called, well, student row, and it'll take a variable called student. So in this case, I'm going to create a row. I will have a column, mid2, and that will be student dot, well, let's just do both. Student dot, is it first name, and student dot last name. I believe that's what we used inside of our model. Yep. And I'm going to make that 4, 2, and this one will be student dot student number, I think student number, yep. And then call MD4, and we'll just do student dot program. And then here we'll just do each student in students. And we'll use student row, student. That is how you spell student, right? I've been looking at that word so much now that it looks like it's spelled wrong, but I don't know if anyone else gets that sometimes. Yeah. It's weird. I look on it on my screen, it looks weird, but when I look on it on the projector, it looks right. I don't know. So, if I refresh, ooh, what's it not like? Okay, so we're not passing a variable called students. What we could, well, instead, what we need to do is use class.students. So that way it looks like, well, displays nothing. But what we also need to be able to do is add a new student to the class. So in this case, I'm thinking what might be the easiest, just so that way we stay all on the same page without having to have a bunch of more complicated pages, is I'm going to create a small modal pop-up that will have the form for creating a new student.
Can you go back to your code this word?
Yes. Which part?
Just trying to get the statement.
Yep. Cool. Okay. So I'm going to be creating a modal. And this is kind of like the base of a modal, and I'm sure you guys know how a modal like opens and closes. But that's what it looks like if you don't. We don't need a lot of content. This is just going to be a fairly basic form. So I'm just going to take the code from this one, and then we can modify it to how we want it. So I'm just going to paste it right here. Something that you can do, don't necessarily recommend it, but you can. You can just put HTML in a pug file, and it should still work. I'm just going to put a button to trigger this. The only issue when you start to like mix and match is sometimes, well, exactly that, if you are mixing and matching. So what's the ID? The ID for this is it's targeting example modal, and this needs to have a ID of example modal. refresh. There we go. So in this case, I'm going to put right here, I'm going to put h1 of student list, and then beside it, I'm going to have a button of type button. It's going to have button primary. And I'm going to copy these data toggles to right here. Create student. And I can just remove that. Okay. So now we can click it, and this modal pops up, and then we can put in our form for being able to create a new. So in here, I'm just going to simplify this into a regular pug, but you don't have to. Actually, I'm just going to, instead of wasting time, HTML to Jade. So there's not like an actual defined way that you have to use pug, but typically what's normal is if you have an ID, you start it at the beginning and then followed by class names. There are, if you guys are familiar with linters, you can lint your pug files to give you warnings if you write it in a way that is not how you want it to. Why did my container go? Oh, because of that. There we go. Okay. So in here instead, we're going to want to have cancel, and we're going to want this to be submit. Because inside of our modal body, probably outside, we're going to create a form. And we'll just tab all of that inside of it. So we're going to create a form group of input, form control, type equals text, name equals first name, and I'm also going to put a label for first name. What's the best way to do that? So first name. I'm just going to copy this a couple times. Okay. So last name, last name, last name, and then is there anything else? We need a student number as well. Student number, student number. Okay. So now we have our form. And when we click submit, well, if we put stuff in it, it will just put it onto the current, well, oh no, because that's type button. This needs to be type submit for that to work. And you can see up here that we have our variables not filled out. So we're going to have to put that as also a method post so that we can access it easier. So on our form, we want to do method as post. And what's the other part? Form, method, post. There's a way that you can say where it's going to submit to. Action. So in this case, let's see. So we're on /classes/view/ and then we're at classes.id, and we'll say student. So the reason why I'm doing this is because we're going to be making it so that you can create a new instructor. We want to also be able to differentiate between a student and an instructor being posted to the instructor being posted to on the server end. So refresh that. Oh, didn't like that. Which part did I not like? Oh, it didn't recognize ID because it's class, not classes. There we go. So now if I inspect on the form, you can see that this is where it's going to go to, which is a 404 right now. So inside of our class, do redder.post. So in this case, we don't need to do a GET request because this will only be handling a post request. It's just going to be handling the new student. So we have view ID/student. We're going to take request, response, next. And this is now where it becomes a little bit trickier. So pretty sure when you find by ID, it gives you the class. So that's the first thing that we're going to have to do is copy that. And we're just going to remove this for now. So we now have this class. But what we want to do is take the new student that we just created. So what we can do is do class dot update. Let me just quickly look at the Mongo documentation. Update. Schema models updating. Okay. So we could just do that as well. So subdocuments. Okay. So with this, what we're going to do, we don't even need to find it by ID. Actually, yeah, sorry. Yes, we are going to find it by ID. So that way, if there's any other students, we have a list of them. So class comes back, and we have const students equals class.students. we're going to push in our new student that we just created. And then should be able to do class.save. Okay. So in theory, this should work. We could just probably even do class.students. I'm just going to copy that out, comment it out, and so now when I go to create a student, Chris Naismith 2030245, submit, and that did not work. So if I look at here, did a post request, it redirected us, and then it said that, oh, it's classes/view, that's why. My bad. Which one was I in? There we go. So now you can see that we have our new student that we just created. So I can do another one, submit, submit, submit. And it says here how many course or students are in it. So I'm just going to commit that, saving new students to class, and push that up. Okay. Let me bump that up. Does anyone, that part was a little bit trickier. Does anyone have any questions on what just happened there?
Are you going to comment that?
Yes. Yeah, I can do that. So find class by its ID in URL. So in your JavaScript class or any other classes, have you guys, well, it'd be different in other things, but you guys went over promises, right? Last semester a little bit. Yep. In, sorry? Oh, the action, yep. So it's right here. So JavaScript is not an asynchronous programming language, which you probably went over before. So when you end up having to when you end up making a connection to like another resource, or you're doing something that you don't know how long it's going to be, it could either be like 1 millisecond or it could be 10 seconds. Previously, you used to do something that was called a callback. So you would give it a function of code that would execute when it was done. Then they introduced something into the language called promises. And what a promise is you can think of it almost in a similar way as like a Boolean. So it's either true, meaning that it successfully did whatever it was supposed to do, or it's false, meaning that it failed. So inside of our class right here, we have classes.findById, and then we give it an ID, and we chain, this is called method chaining, where we do a dot then. So the dot then is evaluating that this returns a promise, and when it's done, this is the type of code that we want to execute on it. So when you do this, you can actually chain multiple promises together to do bits of code that make it a little bit easier. So instead of doing dot then, and then we do this dot save, this is also, we could make this a little bit easier by doing return class.save there. And then right here, we can then chain another then. So we could see error. We can do if error. I'll just remove that, remove that. And the reason why it's sometimes good to break up these thens is then you can have blocks of code that just, in a similar way to what a function does, that a function should usually just do one thing, you can make your then blocks that are only doing one thing. So in here, the first bit of code that we run is we find a class by its ID, and we give it the ID. And then this is the part where now we're wanting, in this block of code, we end up adding the new student to the class. And we end up returning class.save. Then the next bit of code is where we then end up checking if there's an error, and if there is, we do next error. Otherwise, we just redirect back to where we wanted to go before. So the two pieces of code are why did that just redirect to there? Okay, I might have just thrown a small error in there somewhere, but basically they do the exact same thing, and it just makes it like a little bit easier because as you can see with all of these tabbed in, the way that the code is written with these tabbed in things, it makes it more and more unmanageable, and what is called it ends up making a pattern that is called a Christmas tree, which is not very nice. So it's usually a little bit easier to chain promises off of each other, just to like clean up the code and make it so that each block only does one specific thing. So I'll just keep it like this for now because I don't want to waste more time. So yeah, so now that we have students in the class, it might be good. Well, actually first let's check in MLab. I'm wondering if it ended up creating an ID for them or not. I don't think it did. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong one. So week 6, classes. Okay. So it does end up creating a unique ID for each student, which is handy. Typically, as you guys would know, all of our student numbers are different, so that could also be used as a primary key. But in this case, it does generate a ID for every student that is added because of the schema that we're using. So in our view, I'm just going to throw in some buttons so that way we can delete them from the class. So button group href equals classes view So I've just thrown in an anchor to the same sort of thing that we're using. So now you can just click delete and it will delete them when we set that up. So if I go into classes, let's see, get, in this case I'm going to be using array.filter. But I should also know the student ID, which I do not know at this point. So inside of here, I'm going to be using student.id. And typically, doing it like this is not a good idea because usually you'd be using some sort of front-end framework that would allow you to send like a delete request instead of having to use the word delete, and then you could send information of what you're wanting to delete. But in this case, because we're just using just native HTML in order to do this, it makes it a little bit harder to work with it. Or you could just use JavaScript, of course, as well, but we are not doing that right now. So inside of here, we have our student ID. And what we want to do is we want to filter. So we want to filter out the student with the ID matching student ID. So we're going to say const student ID equals request.params.studentID, and then class students.filter, where the student.id does not equal student ID. And we can just do class.students equals that. So because class, or when you use filter on an array, it ends up returning a new array based off of what has happened. So what I do is it grabs a student and it checks its student.id and makes sure that it's not the same ID as the one that's passed in the URL up here. So if I refresh that and delete, I can now delete the students based off of their ID in here. And then same thing, we have to save the class because the students technically belong to the class. And then we just redirect them back to the view. Any questions on that, or want any additional comments on what's happening for when I push the code onto GitHub? Okay. Yeah. The other thing, just to let you guys know, when you're using Mongo, by default, unless if you order something, it will put whatever newest document has been modified at the bottom. So if I were to create a new class, you'll see it's right here. But if I were to modify this one by creating a student, it is, well, it was doing that. Hold on, where did that go? So, oh, there was an error when trying to create the student. Let's try that one more time. Okay. Okay, well, never mind, ignore that part. Usually it does, which is why this one that we were adding to was pushed to the bottom, whereas before it was up here. There might be some other reason why it ended up pushing it to the bottom. Okay. Let's see, is there... I guess the last part that we'll just do is being able to edit a student after you've added them to a class. We'll just put it right beside delete. So inside of view, actually this is going to be, now this is where it gets a little bit more complicated. We're going to create a button, button, and we're going to oh yeah, I guess the only way that we'd be able to do that is if we use JavaScript, so I'm not actually going to be doing that. Because in order to edit it, because we have all the information on the client side of all the different students, we would need to be able to create the modal based off of their information that we already have. But because with everything that's in Pug, you can't edit stuff after it's been sent to the user. So you need to be able to handle that in JavaScript on the front end, which I'm not going to be going into. Of course, you could create an additional page if you wanted to, but I don't think we're going to be doing that. Could also set up edit for class, but I think actually, I think like this is a good part to stop, just because with us doing authentication next week, being able to log in as a user and then see things that only seeing the classes that are specific to that user would be a good place just to stop. So is there any questions about what we covered today with like subdocuments or being able to edit or save? A couple of things are similar to what we did last week, but it's a little bit more complicated just because of the subdocuments. Nope. Okay. So yeah, I guess just as a reminder, next Thursday is assignment 1 part 2 is due. That's due Thursday at 11:59, and of course I'm available by email or Slack if you have any questions or need any help with anything. Besides that, I guess we're done today. Cool. So I'll push the code up to GitHub and push that up. And then besides code, I will just create a Heroku instance for anyone that doesn't know how to do that, just because it is a requirement for the assignment, is, well, not specifically Heroku, but cloud hosted. So if you go to Heroku, you can click new and then new app. We'll say COMP2106, winter 2019, week 6. And create the app. I click GitHub. Search for right here, week 6. Enable automatic deploys and deploy branch. So now this will automatically deploy my code. And if I open up the app, it'll just take a little bit as it's still going, but you can see right now it's just the Heroku default. It's compressing, done. Should be able to refresh. It's loading. There we go. So now the same classes are up here on Heroku. So that's it. Good to go.